What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be chatting with Keith Pompey from Locked On Sixers as James Harden reportedly going to be agreeing to a new contract with the 76ers, sacrificing a lot of money. What does that say about James Harden's desire to win? And will the reinforcements the Sixers have been able to add by way of James Harden giving back some money to the organization help push the Sixers over the top? But first, a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline, because betonline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events with the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news on every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, even golf. They've got everything you could possibly need over at BetOnline. And right now, you can take a look at who the odds-on favorites are to win the 2023 NBA title. The Boston Celtics at plus 600. The Milwaukee Bucks right there with them, also at plus 600. You got the Golden State Warriors in third place at plus 700. LA Clippers at plus 700 as well. And then the Phoenix Suns rounding things out, the top five at plus 900. So for all of that and more odds, head to their website today to learn more about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Joining us now is Keith Pompey from Locked On Sixers. You can follow on Twitter at Pompey on Sixers. Now, Keith, we had James Harden, who took a substantial, reportedly taking a substantial pay cut for this next season. James Harden basically coming out saying, you know what, I told the Sixers, do whatever you need to do. Pay whoever you need to pay, sign whoever you need to sign to put a good roster around me. I'll take whatever is left over. What does James Harden taking a pay cut of this size signal about him effectively, right? It's a 2-year, $70 million deal, player option in the second year. So he's basically making $33 million this next year, which is well below what he could have made as far as his top dollar max amount. What does that say about James Harden himself, his desire to win at the highest level?
You know, it actually says two things. It says, one, that James Harden is determined to win the championship, right? He's taking less money to win the championship to help the 76ers build a roster that will get them there. But it also says that James Harden is betting on himself. Because, you know, when you have a guy like James, who is 33 years old, he's coming off of arguably his worst season, since he's been a starter in the NBA. And still he's saying, hey, look, okay, I'm gonna take this pay cut and I'm gonna do a opt out next year, not opt out, but a player option for the next year. And you know what, I believe that I'm gonna play to my capability and someone's gonna have to pay me. So to me it says two things. He's doing whatever he can to win the championship, but he's also saying, don't believe the hype. I'm not that guy who's washed, and I'm going to come back and prove to you guys that I'm worth the money next year.
It's crazy that we're saying that James Harden maybe had one of his worst seasons, or his worst season since becoming, a de facto NBA starter. And he still almost averaged a triple double, right? Put up, basically 20, 10, and 10. And, we're looking at that as, that's not what we've become accustomed to from James Harden. He just didn't have that same burst, that same, pizzazz, whatever strength to his game that he had when he was, a year in, year out MVP caliber player in Houston, still kind of recovering from that hamstring issue that's been, so problematic for him. How much of the Sixers' success, though, Keith, depends on the version of James Harden that they get this next year?
Oh man, I want to say 70%. I mean, and I could go higher. I mean, it's great that they got PJ Tucker coming in. Danuel House and D'Anthony Melton are going to add depth off the bench, right? But if James Harden is the facilitator, may not go as far as they would like. Now, again, you need James Harden to be the secondary scorer behind Embiid, but you also need him late in the games to take over and become the closer. And if he can't do that, the 76ers aren't going to be as successful as he would like, and as Daryl Morey and Joel Embiid expect. I think that he has to find his old rhythm in order for them to be able to contend for an NBA championship.
And it seems like James Harden is dedicated to putting in that work. It seems like he's back in the lab much earlier in the offseason than he usually is, rehabbing, trying to get his body back to a place where he's capable of doing some of the things he used to be able to do, and maybe getting back to some of that tier one vintage James Harden, if you will, that we came to know as, a year in, year out top 5 player in the NBA. I'm not saying he needs to be that, but if he can get close to that, then that dynamic duo of him and Embiid could cause a lot of trouble in the East. Now, you ran through a few of those names there a moment ago, Keith, the kind of rotation additions that the Sixers have made here: PJ Tucker, DeAnthony Melton, Danuel House Jr. Basically, Daryl Morey kind of, creating the Philadelphia Rockets, if you will, kind of, grabbing all these ex-Rockets. DeAnthony Melton, who was almost a Houston Rocket once upon a time. Of these guys, how do you feel about each of these guys, and who do you think has the chance to be the most impactful of that bunch of rotation guys?
Okay, let's start with PJ Tucker. First of all, I like what he brings. Some people may say PJ Tucker, 37 years old. Some people may think that he lost it, but what he does is he's like he's a corner three type of guy. I'm a guard, your best forward, or sometimes even your best perimeter defender if it's not a point. I mean perimeter player if it's a non-point guard or something like that, right? I think that he's the guy that's going to be the most impactful for him because he provides that toughness that the 76ers lacked over the last couple of years. Not only that, he's a guy that Joel Embiid really wanted to play with. He's a guy who's played with James Harden before. So you could say the same thing about Danuel House. But I think that what he can do is he could be the one who they both have the utmost respect for, and he's going to be the leader, the guy that brings the. I think he's going to step in and become the glue guy from day one. Now, when we talk about Danuel House, Danuel House is going to bring something that they don't have on defense, right? He's going to be a quality, another toughness guy, but also he's a guy that's coming off of a career best shooting performance when he was with the Utah Jazz. And that's what the Sixers need. When you have a guy of his magnitude coming off the bench, because we know the Sixers are going to stagger it, they're going to basically play a two-man game with Embiid and Maxey or Harden, whoever he's in the game with. And House is another guy who can help stretch the floor to provide space. I don't look at him as a starter right now just because you have Tobias Harris still on the team. But again, when you look at their bench, they lack depth, and he's going to help. The same thing with Melton. I think they're kind of like similar. They're guys who are going to get after you on defense, but they're also guys, and let's face it, they're going to help James a lot because these are guys who are known for knocking down corner threes and taking corner threes. They're not guys that you're looking at just going to say, oh, we got to run plays for them. No, they're going to be over in the corner, stretching the floor and doing things. So I think when you look at the 76ers lack of depth that they had, the lack of toughness, all three of these guys are going to help out a lot. But I think PJ Tucker is the guy that's going to get them, hopefully, that they're thinking that's hopefully going to the biggest acquisition that's going to enable them to get out of the second round.
You mentioned his name there just a moment ago, Keith, but Tobias Harris, I feel like he's, at times had a bit of some gray area as far as just what his, some uncertainty maybe and what his future would look like in Philadelphia. So to you, what does the future hold for Tobias Harris? Is he a piece that maybe needs to be moved, or is Philly kind of content at this point with what he provides in conjunction with Harden, Embiid, Maxey, the rest of the guys on the roster?
That's a great question. I mean, I like Tobias Harris, right? The question is, a lot of people look at Tobias and they look at his input, and you say to yourself, but look at all the money he's making. And I think that's where you get in trouble at, right? That's when people think of it. You look at Tobias, if Tobias is making 20 million a year, people are like, oh, okay, he's a great piece in today's NBA. But now the fact that he's making 37, that's where the problem is. Now, I also think when you have James Harden who plays, if he's going to be able to play at a high level, and then you have Embiid and then Tobias and Maxey, being the third or fourth options, you could flip flop them. I think that will work out well. I think just the problem is when you have James struggling and you have these other guys doing it, struggling, that's when Tobias gets more magnified and people are looking at his production and then they're saying, hey, it doesn't add up with the money. You know what I mean? But outside of that, I think when you look at him as a third or a fourth option, he's fine. Now, it also helps that you have a PJ Tucker there who's going to be able to guard better, guard tougher opponents. So now you can take that out of Tobias. But I think that the one thing Tobias is going to have to do, he's going to have to change his game a little bit because he may be more of that catch and shoot type of guy as well.
Yeah, hopefully with the addition of PJ Tucker, right, he takes on the hardest defensive assignment. Maybe it allows Tobias Harris to get a little bit of a breather defensively a little bit. I've kind of, shout out to all these Rockets parallels in play. Back in the 2016-17 season, a lot of Rockets fans were upset with Ryan Anderson, who at the time was a good player, knockdown three-point shooter, but he was making about $20 million a year. And a lot of Rockets fans were like, yo, why are we paying this guy so much? And I see a lot of the similar parallels with Tobias Harris, where he's good at what he does, but he might be, a tad overpaid for what he's actually providing you. Keith, at this point, is it safe to assume that the starting lineup for the Sixers, maybe it's a little too early to predict it, but I've got to say, we're looking at Maxey, Harden, Tobias Harris, PJ Tucker, Joel Embiid. Is that a pretty safe bet for the starting lineup for next year?
Yeah, that's a safe bet, unless Tobias is traded before the start of the season. You know what I mean? But yeah, without that, that's an extremely safe bet right there.
It's going to be really interesting to see how these new look 76ers play next year, all this added depth. What version of James Harden will we get next year in Philadelphia? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Sixers. Keith, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Thank you, man.